Good day. This is Jove Aguas, and these are my lectures in theories on reality. And in this lecture, I will be discussing about the Oriental theories of reality. I will be dividing my discussion or lecture into four parts. I will first discuss Hinduism, and then Buddhism, and then Taoism, and Confucianism. So in this first part, I will be talking about Hinduism, the theory of reality according to the according to Hindu philosophy. So first, Hinduism is one of the oldest religions in the world, and it is also one of the most rich and diverse of all the religions. Accordingly, it is quite impossible to come up with a unified or a common definition of Hinduism because it doesn't have a first of all, it does not have a single founder or a common doctrine. At least we can define Hinduism as a complex set of interrelationships among many sorts of people, belief systems, and practices, rather than a single uniformly structured, bureaucratically organized, and centrally codified religion, which we can see uh, in Christianity, in Roman Catholicism, for example. The word Hindu is derived from the Sanskrit term Sindhu, the historical name for the Indus River in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. By the end of the 18th century, the term Hindu was used by European merchants and colonizers to refer to the followers of the Indian religion. So the term Hinduism is a relatively new word having been introduced by the British writers in the early 19th century to refer to the religious, philosophical, and cultural tradition that originated in India. So Hinduism is regarded as the oldest religion in the world. Now, Hinduism traces its roots in the merging of two ancient cultures, namely the Aryan and the Indus Valley, which resulted in the formation of the Indian civilization in the second millennium before the Common Era. There's no single founder of Hinduism, unlike the other religions. Like, for example, in Christianity, you have Christ, Judaism, of course, you can trace it back to Moses, and Islam to the Prophet Muhammad. But in Hinduism, we cannot find a single uh, founder because it evolved from ancient teachings and doctrines. It now comprises several involved systems of philosophical or philosophy, beliefs, rituals, and practices, and it does not have a clearly defined boundaries, although it denotes a set of traditions united by certain common features, such as shared ritual patterns, shared revelation, a belief in the reincarnation and liberation, and a particular form of social organization or caste doctrine, practice, society, story, and devotion. So the doctrine of Hinduism is expressed in a textual tradition based on the Vedas, the oldest core of Hindu religious utterance and texts, and organized through India's long history, primarily by members of the learned Brahman class, the highest of the caste system. Now, the term philosophy in Indian thought is referred to as darshana, which means vision or instrument of vision, to see, right? Vision. So it stands for the actual perception of truth and includes the means by which we are led to the truth. So to see the self as an important concept in all schools of Indian philosophy. And philosophy is an instrument for seeing the self. See the self. So what you do is you sit beside a master or teacher giving instruction, and that will allow you to see yourself. Of course, the self in the context of the bigger reality. Now let's talk about the Vedas and the Upanishads because these are the two main sources of Hindu doctrines. Okay. The Hindu doctrines are based on two categories of sacred texts, namely the Shruti and Smriti. Simriti. That's a very difficult term to if you are not a native Indian. Though Hinduism has many sacred texts, only the Vedas are called Shruti. Shruti, which literally means that which is heard. The non-Vedic literature or sacred literature is called Smruti, Smruti, and that's spelled as Smriti, which literally means that which is remembered. The word Shruti points to the direct contact with the divine that resulted in the Vedas. So the Shruti text is an eternal principle and therefore applicable to everybody at all times. The Smruti is applicable only to some people at some times. Now, the Vedas were revealed to the rishis. It's rishis. It's a word that means seer, seer. And the Hindus believe that the rishis, Rishis, saw the truths that are contained in the Vedas. Of course, they did not invent the text. Okay, they did not invent or create them out of their what do you call this? Out of their own minds. Okay, because if it is already created by their own minds, it's no longer a Shruti; it becomes Smruti. Okay, so for this reason, the Vedas are called Apaurushaya, no? Apaurushaya, which means it is an impersonal or entirely supernatural. So the Vedas are revealed to the seer, to the rishis. The Vedas are the earliest recorded of Hindu scriptures and the oldest extant literary work of the Aryan race. And the term Veda means knowledge. It's a Sanskrit term which means knowledge. Now, the origin of Indian or Hindu philosophy can be traced to the Vedas, especially the Upanishads, which is the Upanishad is considered to be the last part or the end part of the Vedas. The Upanishads contains the teachings and the doctrines of different Hindu thinkers. So it's no longer a Shruti, it is a Smruti. Although many Hindus revere the Vedas as eternal truths revealed to ancient sages, some do not associate the existence of the Vedas to a certain god or gods or person. They believe that these are the laws of the spiritual world and that they will still exist and prevail even if they were not revealed to the sages or to the rishis. So Hindus believe that because of the spiritual truths of the Vedas, the eternal, they continue to be expressed in different and new ways. Okay, so when you interpret that, you heard the Vedas and then you try to interpret, it's no longer a Shruti text. It becomes Smruti text. Okay. So there are four Vedas, namely the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Yugur Veda, and the Atharva Veda. And its Vedic collection has four subdivisions. The Samhitas is the first, which is the original collection of the hymns, of the songs or poetry, And then the ritual texts, which explain how to carry out the Vedic ceremonies. And then you have uh, the forest renounce the world. I'm sorry. So you have the ritual texts, and then you have the forest treatises. Sorry. So the forest treatises, these are supposedly the spiritual writings of the forest dwellers. The forest dwellers are the hermits, have renounced the world. That's the third part. And then you have the Upanishads, the last part. Okay, the Upanishads. So the Rig Veda is the first and most important Veda. And each Veda is divided into these four parts. You have the primary one, the Veda proper, and then being the Samhita, which contains the sacred mantras. And then the other three parts form commentaries. So you have the ritual text, and then the forest treatises, and then the Upanishads. So these are uh, commentaries already, because the original is the Rig Veda. Okay, so they are usually in prose and are believed to be slightly later in age than the Samhita, the original, the first, no, the Rig Veda. So uh, while the other Vedas focus on rituals, the Upanishads focus on uh, the spiritual insight, the philosophical teachings, and discuss Brahman and reincarnation. So the philosophical part of the Veda would be the last part, the Upanishads. Okay, so you have the Samhita, and then you have the uh, ritual texts, and then you have the forest treatises. So these are the four subdivisions of the Veda. It's Veda. There are four Vedas: the Rig, the Sama, the Yagur, and then the Atharva. And each one has four subdivisions. And the last subdivision is the Upanishads, which is now the explanation, right? The insight, focusing on the insight, philosophical teachings of the Veda. Okay, so although the Upanishads is the last part, it could probably the most important for modern Hinduism or for the modern thinkers, because it contains the teachings of the great Hindu masters and show the path towards moksha, or liberation from being reincarnated again. So moksha is the liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth. Okay. So all the other Hindu texts, other than the Shruti, the Vedas, are collectively called the Smruti, which literally means, as I've said, that which is remembered. And the most important of the Smrutis are the epics, namely the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And an integral part of the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most popular sacred texts of Hinduism. The Bhagavad Gita contains the philosophical teachings of Krishna, which is reincarnation of the god Vishnu, as told to Prince Arjuna. Uh, the setting was on the eve of a great war. So before the war, there was a conversation between Prince Arjuna and Krishna. Okay. Now, the ancient Vedic uh, Samhita, like the Rig Veda, were polytheistic, meaning it advocated or taught a religion of many gods, or devas, worshipped by means of sacrificial offerings. And the fundamental doctrine, on the other hand, the fundamental doctrine of the Upanishads is monistic idealism. That means that there exists only one reality, a consciousness, one reality, one consciousness. And the Upanishads taught that behind the many gods, as taught by the Rig Veda, is an infinite spirit, an infinite consciousness, which they call the Brahman. Brahman. So this is the religion of monism because there's only one reality, Brahman. Here, the aim of life is to discover through meditation one's true spiritual nature, which is not different from the eternal being or not different from the Brahman. So for them, everything is Brahman. Everything is Brahman. We are, and our our aim in life is to discover through meditation that we are one with the Brahman, with reality. Okay? So the fundamental doctrine of the Upanishads, as I already mentioned, monistic idealism, thought that there exists only one reality, one consciousness, and everyone, everything is Brahman in its core and should be one with the Brahman. Okay? So the ultimate goal of life is to attain nirvana, and once we attain nirvana, we can be one with the Brahman. And nirvana is attained when one is released or liberated from the earthly life or from moksha. Okay, moksha is the uh, uh, liberation. Okay, now this cycle of death and rebirth is called samsara. Samsara, cycle of death and rebirth. And one can attain a release from the samsara through enlightenment. Enlightenment. And enlightenment starts with the understanding that this world is merely an illusion or maya. Illusion or maya. So, the teaching is that man should not cling to this world because everything in this world is temporary. This is not permanent. Okay? However, human action is governed by a cosmic law, the law of karma. The law of karma states that the good action results to positive outcome, but action will result to bad outcome or negative result. Okay? So, let's discuss a little bit about Nirvana, about Brahman. Okay? Everything and everyone is Brahman and should be one with the Brahman. The ultimate goal in life is to attain Nirvana and we become one with the Brahman. But what is this Brahman? Because Brahman is related to another concept in Indian philosophy, which is Atman. So, Atman and Brahman are the two important concepts in the Upanishads, in the whole of Indian philosophy. The Upanishadic thinkers were then looking for a common denominator of all existence. And they were thinking, what is behind of the many? What is that principle that is behind the many? Well, of course, we have already said that they believe in many gods, many devas, many spiritual beings. And of course, if we look at the world is composed of many things. So there should be a unifying factor behind the multiplicity of of things in the world. And for them, the one divine behind this, all many devas, is a supreme power behind all the powers of the sacrifice. This is identified as the Brahman. The Brahman is the ultimate and supreme reality, which uh, which transcends all things, the underlying principle of all things. Okay, it is also considered as the univocal, the universal self, and the soul and the spirit of reality. So the Brahman is uncreated, of course. It is eternal, it is infinite, it is transcendent, and an all embracing principle. The Brahman contains in itself both being and non being, and it is the sole reality, the ultimate cause, the foundation, the source, the goal of all existence. The Brahman causes the universe, the origin of the universe, and of all things to emanate from itself. And it's also the Brahman that transforms itself into the universe or assumes the appearance of the universe. So the Brahman is in all things. Okay, it is the Brahman. It's in all things. It is it is the self. It is all the beings. The Brahman is the creator, the preserver, the transformer of everything. Okay, so the Brahman is composed of several. Well, we can say several components. So it is first you have the Brahma, the creator, and then Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Of course, there are different interpretations, however, as to whether this ultimate reality is best conceived as lacking attributes and qualities, like, for example, the impersonal Brahman, or as a personal God, especially because there are three, uh, we can say, incarnations of the Brahman, like the Vishnu, the Shiva of the or the Shakti. Okay, so this being the preferences of adherents called the Vaishnavas, the Shaivas, and the Shaktas, respectively. So there are many different interpretations as to the composition of the Brahman or to the attributes or qualities of the Brahman. Okay, so the belief in the importance of the search for the one that is all has been a characteristic features of Indian spiritual life. Okay, so now let's go to the next concept, which is the Atman. Okay, so uh, if the Brahman is the one that is the universal, but we cannot see the Brahman. All right, we cannot see the Brahman. The Brahman is everywhere, but we cannot actually see where the Brahman is. So there is now what do you call this? There is a uh, there is another aspect of reality, which is the Atman. And is uh, the Atman is the aspect of reality, the other side of reality that can be identified, that has some definitive features. Okay, so uh, you call this the Atman or the self. So the Atman is the part of reality that we can see. I remember the example given to us in the class by my professor, Dr. Magdalena Villava, who likened the Brahman to air. No? So the air is everywhere. It can be it's above, it's on our side, it's below, it's everywhere. We cannot see the air. Now imagine if you put the air inside a balloon, for example. Okay, so puff air in the balloon, and now there is air in the balloon. And now you can identify the air inside the balloon. So of course there's still air outside, but there is now air inside the balloon. And the air inside the balloon may be similar to the air outside. But you can now identify the air inside the balloon. It becomes definite. Now that is an analogy of the Atman. So there's a universal self, the Brahman, and there is now an individual self, the Atman. We say the purpose of life is to understand that we are Brahman, okay, that we are one with the Brahman. So when you pop the balloon, the air escapes outside the balloon, it becomes one with the Brahman. And that is, for the Hindu, that is the object or the aim of life, to be one with the Brahman, to realize that there's no individual self, okay, but the true self is one with the Brahman. Now let's focus on the concept of the self, because the human person, for in this context, okay, So has three components or layers. And the first is the physical self, which is the outer layer, the outermost layer. Then you have the jiva, the soul. And finally, the center of the core of one's being, the Atman, which is the true self. So we can say the Atman is the true, is the subjective, the Brahman is the objective reality. Or we can put it that way. In the Upanishads, comes up with five types or sheets of selves or the kosas. So you have the physical self. It's called the Anamayatman. Anamayatman. Atman is the self. No? Anamay means physical. Anama. This is represented by our body. And then you have the second self, the second level, which is the self as a principle of life. That's prana mayatman. Okay, prana mayatman. This is represented by our breath, because breath is a sign of life. And then the self as a principle of the will or volition. That's mana mayatman. And this is represented by our will and desire. And the self as a principle of intellection, the vijna mayatman. And this is represented by our intellect, our thought. And then the self as the principle of bliss, the ananda mayatman. And this is a self that joins the Brahman. Okay, it joins the Brahman. Of course, when we die, we will shed off all the other levels of the selves, and we will be an Ananda Mayatman, and that will be the level of the self that will be joining the Brahman. Of course, that means we are already in Nirvana. So, what is this Nirvana? Okay, um, so Nirvana, as we have said, is the ultimate uh, the ultimate principle or the ultimate destination of life. In Hinduism, they teach that all living things are Brahman in their core. Everything is Brahman actually. But of course, particularly man should be a Brahman. And enlightenment is attained by becoming attuned in the Brahman with when we are attuned with the Brahman within us. So only then can we reach Nirvana, which is the ultimate goal of Hinduism. Now, nirvana is the state of bliss when the soul is released from the seemingly endless cycle of rebirth, and the release from the wheel of life that allows access to nirvana is known as moksha. Moksha is liberation. And the ultimate goal of life, referred to as moksha, nirvana, or samadhi, is understood in several different ways. So there are many different, again, different interpretations of this. It could mean the realization of one's union with the divine, or the realization of one's eternal relationship with the divine reality, or the realization of the unity of all existence, or the perfect unselfishness and knowledge of the self, or the attainment of perfect mental peace, or the detachment from worldly desires. But in any case, such realization liberates us from samsara. Samsara means the cycle of death and rebirth. The liberation from samsara is moksha. And once we attain moksha, we go to nirvana. Okay? Now, let's go to another very important principle in Hinduism. And this is the notion of Maya. Maya. According to Hinduism, the Brahman, as the cause of all things, has a unique power. It has a unique Shakti. And this power is called Maya. And the Brahman manifests itself in the world with the help of this Maya. So Maya is a power of the Brahman. The term Maya means illusion. Okay, it means illusion. So the world and the things that we find in the world come into existence because of the power of Maya. Now remember that the Maya is a unique power of the Brahman to project an illusion. So the world is an illusion. It's a projection of Maya as an illusion. It's a creation of Maya. Since it's a creation of illusion, then the world is just an illusion. But what does illusion mean? Illusion must not be interpreted as something that is unreal or non-existence. The world is not. The world, we cannot say the world is non-existent because the world is here. It exists. But when we say the world is an illusion, it doesn't mean that it is unreal or that it does not exist at all. It is real because we can experience it. Okay? But it is an illusion because Maya has created the world as an appearance. So, an appearance is real, but since it is an appearance, at some point, the appearance will disappear. So, at some point, since the world is an illusion, at some point, the world will just disappear. It is in the sense that the world is an illusion, meaning it is not something permanent. It is not something that will stay forever. It is here, created as an illusion by the power of Maya, of the Brahman. At some point, it will be here. In Advaita Vedanta, this is illustrated with the help of the famous rope snake illustration. What is this rope snake illustration? So when you see a rope, for example, okay, or a string, or a big string, or a big rope, okay, uh, especially if this rope you see in the dark, okay, so we would think that it is a snake because you cannot fully see, you know, what it is. It just appears to be, a long something. So you thought it is, well, you thought it is a snake because it looks like a snake. Okay, so we perceive it to be snake, but the rope only appears as a snake. So the rope appearing as a snake is just an illusion. Okay, so the world, the objects in this world is not the way they appear to us. They appear to be, they appear to be very attractive. They appear to be very good. You know, they have all these, uh, what do you call this? They have all these beautiful things. They have all the glitters. But in reality, they are not. They are just illusion. The world appears as an illusion. So the things in this world are neither ultimately real nor wholly unreal. They are illusory. Okay? And therefore, we should not cling to the objects in the world because they are only temporary, they are transitory, they are impermanent. Okay? But of course, the world has its own grandeur, and therefore, we want to cling to the world. Now, according to the Advaita Vedanta, one of the main strands of Hinduism, this error in the perception of the world arises because of the superimposition of one reality on another, like the superimposition of the appearance of the snake on the reality of the rope. Okay, so there is the superimposition of reality of the snake to the reality of the rope. The superimposition is called adhyasa, which means the apparent presentation to our consciousness by way of memory of something previously observed in some other things. Uh, So, in general, the cause of this is ignorance or avidya. Ignorance or avidya, which means that no, we cannot fully perceive, we are ignorant of the reality. Okay, our human intellect cannot perceive. No? Now, it is avidya does not mean absence of knowledge, because there is of course knowledge because we have prior perception, only that it is an erroneous knowledge. A man trapped in avidya does not know what is real and thinks that the appearance or the appearances are real. So a man trapped in avidya does not know that this world is just an appearance. Okay? So the individual identifies himself with the empirical self and he equates his existence with his physical body. But, and of course, under the influence of the Maya and avidya, he dissociates himself from the ultimate reality or from the Brahman within him because he thought that his physical body is the real, but the physical body is just an appearance. There is something real within. That real within us is the Brahman. So if we cling to the physical, to the material world, we think that it is real, but it is not. There's something real within us, and it's the Brahman within. And man suffers in the grip of incessant desires and ignorance. So ignorance of one's true self leads to ego consciousness of the body and the phenomenal world. And this grounds one in karma or in desire. In the perpetual chain of karma and so since we cannot find our real self, we cling to the world, we are not liberated. We don't attain moksha. We are never liberated from this. Okay? So the thing is, we should realize that this world is temporary, it is impermanent, and therefore we should detach ourselves from the world. So when we acquire knowledge, the duality of the self and the Brahman disappears. Then we realize that the self is really one with Brahman. This realization of our self, therefore, puts an end to ignorance or avidya. Okay? So the freedom from bondage of ignorance is moksha. So when we realize the true nature of the world as Maya and the reality of Atman and Brahman, we become free from the shackles of desires, aspirations, passions, karma, avidya. So we attain moksha or liberation. Of course, only a few Hindus, such as the monks and those that are really dedicated to the service of God, seeks moksha. But it is the goal of all, no, it's relevant to all Hindus, and it should be relevant to everybody. So the hierarchical values and social institutions are determined by moksha as a religious doctrines, no, and practices. And the root purpose of Hinduism is to understand that what one must do to attain this release from our bondage and attain spiritual liberation. Okay? Of course, there are many different uh, interpretations of the moksha. Okay? Right. So, last point, karma and samsara. Hinduism generally accepts the doctrine of transmigration and rebirth, reincarnation. No? So, our body transfers from one body to another. So the body is compared to an old cloth or old dress or coat that when it gets old, it needs to be replaced. So what remains is the soul. And the soul will transfer to another body. But how you will transfer to another body or what will be your next, existence kind of life, the next life will be determined by karma, the cosmic law of karma. Okay. So karma is the law that states that if you do good, then it will result to something good, something positive. You will have a better life in your next life. But if you live your life rather evil, then the next life will be, well, worse than this. All right. So every action that you do has its own consequence, good or bad. And the consequence will depend on the quality of the act. So if it's a good act, then the good result. bad act, bad result. So the samsara is, is anchored. The the reincarnation of birth and rebirth is based on this law of karma. No? So if you have a bad karma, you can be relegated to a lower caste or a lower life. No, so if you're a good person, then in your next life you will probably have a better life. But if you're a bad person, you may no longer be a human being in your next life. You can be one of your pets. No, if you probably end being a dog, and if you are a bad dog, you will turn out into be a lower form of animal like a cockroach. If you are a bad cockroach, then you could probably a worm. No, I remember in the movie 7 Years in Tibet, there was it's a movie about the Dalai Lama and the character played, I think, by Brad Pitt. And while the monks were constructing, they were building a what was that? I think it was a monastery or a church or something. They were very careful in digging the ground. They were very careful digging the ground. And the character of Brad Pitt asked the Dalai Lama why the monks are so slow. And the Dalai Lama said, well, because they were very careful not to hit the worms. And the character of Brad Pitt asked why, because they thought uh, the worms could be one of their ancestors. So, well, I don't know. Probably it's just a very a joke on the part of the Dalai Lama, but that explains, this concept of moksha, of karma and moksha, right? So, uh, in Hinduism, they recognize different levels or different paths to liberation. There is the path of knowledge, uh, the jhana marga or jnana yoga. You study the text, contemplate uh, your oneness with the Brahman. Okay, so it's liberation based on knowledge. Well, the second is achieved through meditation, and this is what do you call this? This is the karma yoga. Okay, I'm sorry. It's achieved through the one in deep meditation is bhakti yoga. Okay, so you pray, you devote yourself, you worship particular deity, and then the last one is the way through action, the karma yoga. Okay, so you do the good acts. Okay, so you help people, works of mercy, and so on and so forth. So you have the uh, jhana jnana yoga or jhana marga yoga, the same. It means path. And then you have the bhakti marga or bhakti yoga, and then you have the karma marga or karma yoga, doing your duty, etc., etc. And then after that, well, we attain liberation. Okay, so that's Hinduism, the theories of reality in Hinduism, in a very well, very concise uh, discussion. And I hope you have learned something from this lecture or from the discussion. So thank you very much for listening. Watch out for the second part of my lecture.